Okay, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2023 Affordable Housing Program Compliance webinar. My name is Kelly. I'm on the AHP compliance team, and I review initial monitoring requests. I will be presenting today with my colleague, who will introduce herself now.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon, and I'm a part of the compliance team, and I conduct the long-term monitoring reviews.
And this presentation is being conducted remotely. Everyone is placed on listen-only mode and will be muted for the duration of the presentation. We appreciate your patience in advance if we encounter any technical difficulties. And as a quick reminder, if you encounter any technical difficulty issues with the presentations, please contact Kathy Chan at 415-616-2770, or you can send her an email. Okay, so yesterday afternoon, we emailed a copy of the presentation slides to everyone who registered for the webinar. And if you did not receive the email, feel free to contact us and we can send you a copy of the presentation. And our contact information is at the end of the presentation. Okay, so now let's get started. All right, today we are going to discuss what to expect after the announcement of your AHP award and how to plan for a successful disbursement and initial monitoring review. We will be covering documentation requirements for disbursement and initial monitoring, maintaining the project scoring commitments from the original application or any modifications, maintaining the project's need for subsidy and feasibility, basic requirements for the AHP retention documents, and common causes of non-compliance. Our goal is to avoid pitfalls that may cause a recapture of the AHP subsidy. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to add them to the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen. We will read and respond to your questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please do not use the chat box for questions because that feature is harder for us to track responses. And another quick reminder, in order to receive credit for webinar attendance, an attendee needs to stay for the entire presentation, as mentioned in the webinar invitation. So after the announcement of an AHP award, a project has 4 years to complete construction. The bank tracks construction progress by asking sponsors and members to complete an online semi-annual survey twice a year until the project is deemed complete, which is defined as having all home buyer loans in escrow closed and having the AHP subsidy fully dispersed. As it gets closer to the 4-year deadline, we will follow up on the semi-annual status report for more information on the project. If there is a change in staff, please notify the bank so that we can update our records with the most current contact person's information. If there are significant changes in the project's characteristics, please notify the bank so that we may modify the project profile and rescore the project to ensure it remains eligible for AHP subsidy. The project must have good cause for any modification and must demonstrate why it cannot meet previous commitments, which includes change in targeting. As of 2021, under our new regulation, sponsors must show that they have attempted to meet the original commitment for a reasonable period of time or demonstrate that a cure is not possible. AHP procedures and policies are codified in our annual AHP implementation plan. In addition, the bank sends out special attention bulletins and notices when significant changes occur in the program. You can find these notices posted on our website under Community Program, AHP section, and under Policy Updates. So next we will cover the award disbursement. So when you are ready to request disbursement of the AHP subsidy, visit our website and review disbursement request instructions. We aim to review disbursements within 45 days, But this processing depends on the complexity of the disbursement and also the responsiveness of the sponsor and member to additional questions. You must send a request to the bank to create a secure portal workspace by submitting the required forms available on our website prior to uploading documents electronically. Once the forms are submitted, please email the bank and let us know that the disbursement package is ready for review. And we will cover electronic document submission later in our presentation. Disbursement requests can be made anytime after an award announcements are made. Keep in mind that the minimum requirements for disbursement for renovation or new construction projects, sponsor must have full site control, start of construction must be imminent, and all financing sources committed. For down payment assistance programs, we require homeowners must be selected and income qualified. To process your disbursement request, we will review the project's financing and scoring commitments, project readiness, and ability to complete the project within a 4-year timeline. Similar to the application review, the project must continue to demonstrate a need for subsidy, be financially feasible, and meet its original scoring commitments. The bank will review the updated financial workbook, which will include the final homebuyer worksheet, development budget, AHP benchmarks, and other documentation available to validate the project scoring commitments. The most helpful document in the disbursement package is the disbursement request form, which provides a checklist and instructions on what is required for disbursement. This form can be found on the bank's website. Also, we will request any final documentation that is available at disbursement rather than waiting until initial monitoring to collect those documents. Once the AHP funds are dispersed to the member must deliver the AHP subsidy to the project owner within 30 days from the bank's funding date. It is very important to meet the 30-day grace period to avoid interest repayment to the bank. Okay, so now let's go over the information that will be requested at disbursement. For all projects, documentation validating the land cost is required if it was not previously submitted at application. A completed signed HIQW, which stands for Household Income Qualification Workbook, and backup income documentation will be required for 10% of all homeowners in the project. For projects with only 2 units, documentation will be collected for both units. An estimated settlement statement must be provided for all home buyers currently in escrow. The bank also requires documentation for all previously closed escrows, including the final settlement statement, documentation for sources paid outside of closing, and final AHP retention document, which includes the AHP note and recorded deed of trust with the AHP rider. For projects that are complete at the time of disbursement, additional documentation will also be required. For cost validation, backup documentation must be provided for 100% of sponsor-provided construction management costs and 35% of all other development costs. If there is a deficit in the budget, the gap source documentation will also be required. If promotion of empowerment and community stability commitments are in place, documentation for those commitments must also be provided. And now I will pass it off to Sharon.
Thank you, Kelly. So as mentioned earlier, the bank will only accept disbursement request documents electronically through a secure online portal hosted by BlackBerry Workspace. Due to information security concerns, documents submitted via Dropbox or other file sharing links will not be accepted. Prior to accessing the secure portal, an executed workspace setup request form must be provided by the member and sponsor for each project. This workspace used for disbursement and initial monitoring is in addition to the workspace set up at application. Visit our website to review submission instructions and to download the workspace setup request form. Please send us an email when all disbursement documents have been uploaded to the appropriate folders. Now let's move on to initial monitoring. AHP regulations require the bank to monitor all projects. By signing the direct subsidy agreement, members and sponsors have agreed to the bank's monitoring requirements. We strongly encourage members to actively work with project sponsors throughout the process so both parties are aware of changes early on. When the project is deemed complete, meaning construction is complete, the AHP subsidy is fully dispersed, and all home buyers' loans have closed escrow, the bank will contact both sponsor and member to start collecting materials for the initial monitoring review. This includes documentation that was not collected at disbursement. The project sponsor and member will be notified by email. The bank will provide instructions on how to complete the initial monitoring materials, including the AHP certificate of member, the financial workbook, the AHP household income qualification workbook, and acceptable forms of verification for promotion of empowerment and community stability. And we'll go over these documents shortly. To prepare for disbursement and initial monitoring, we recommend creating an AHP file so that all AHP documents will be available from application to project completion, including homebuyer qualification documentation. The following slide will show a list of relevant information. We recommend communicating the program requirements and application commitments to your asset manager, compliance staff, and especially those involved with empowerment services and income qualification. Let's take a look at the workbook to go over the AHP income guidelines. The AHP Household Income Qualification Workbook is an instructional workbook that has 4 tabs, as shown at the bottom of this slide. Tab 1, Guidelines. Tab 2, Acceptable Verification. Tab 3, Instructions. And tab 4 is the Household Income Qualification form. Tab 2 outlines acceptable forms of income, assets, and ID verification for each household member. Tab 3 provides step-by-step instructions on how to complete the bank's AHP income qualification worksheet. Tab 4 is the AHP Household Income Qualification Worksheet. It serves as an income certification form. This worksheet also calculates and shows the math on how the household income is calculated. The shaded areas are protected. For Section 1, you enter the income qualification date, the MSA region, and the 100% AMI for the household. Section 2 lists all household members currently living in the same or at the same address. Tax returns or other third-party documentation are required to validate all household member identification. Section 3, report all income earning assets of the household. Check the small box if there is no asset to report. If total assets exceed $5,000, an asset statement or asset statements are required to validate what was reported. In Section 4, note in the reminder in red to use at least 2 calculation methods for employment income and choose the highest income projection. Now, household member number one, employment income is estimated by using the hourly rate calculation based on information provided by the verification of employment. Household member two, employment income is estimated by using year-to-date calculation based on pay stubs provided. This yields a higher income projection than using average pay per period calculation. A reminder that the first pay stub of the year is required to validate the start date. Household member number three is 18 years old at the time of move-in. So no income documentation is required, as income from household members under 18 do not constitute an annual income for the bank's income guidelines. Household member number four reported zero income. Therefore, a zero income affidavit or certificate is required. At the bottom of the worksheet, there are two signature lines. Both the owner and sponsor's signature are required once the total income is determined. If your project uses a HUD or tax credit form to qualify household income, you do not need to complete this worksheet, as the bank accepts the HUD and tax credit form. But you do need to make sure that you're following our qualification guidelines. Remember, you can always refer to the instructions, which is on the third tab of the workbook, if you have questions on how to complete the HRPW. And you can also contact any of the consultants, the compliance consultants, if you require technical assistance. And now I'm going to hand it back to Kelly.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, so now we'll go over the materials required. The bank requires third-party documentation to validate the project's various scoring categories, such as targeting, empowerment services, and community stability. Depending on the project's completion status, documentation may be required at disbursement or initial monitoring. When preparing documentation for empowerment, services, and community stability, refer to the bank's website for a list of acceptable forms of verification. A final Excel workbook for all owner-occupied projects is required. For construction and rehab projects, we analyze the project's need for subsidy and feasibility by reviewing the home buyer information worksheet in the development budget. If the buyers are offered a 0% interest mortgage, the discounted financing worksheet will be required. So now let's take a look at the initial monitoring workbook. So this workbook contains 7 worksheet tabs, starting with the workbook instruction and notes. We recommend reviewing the information within the instruction tab before completing the workbook. Also, be sure to use the latest version of the workbook. The date and version number are shown in the top right corner of the instructions and notes pages. And the sample shown on the slide is the most current version, as it is dated January 2023. So please do not use an older version from disbursement or application, as we will have to return it to you to update. A link to the current workbook is also included in the initial email you will receive. You may also find all updated AHP documents for initial monitoring and disbursement on the bank's website under resources. So the home buyer information is the second tab of the workbook. So this worksheet contains information on each home buyer, including household income, purchase price, and loan payments. We review the information to ensure the project is meeting its income targeting and affordability commitments. The worksheet also calculates the project sources of funds. Similar to the application workbook, The green shaded cells are locked from editing, and the white cells are for data entry. So make sure the buyer's income information is consistent with what was reported on their income qualification worksheet. And also, information in the middle section of the worksheet should be consistent with the buyer's final closing statements. If the sponsor provided discounted permanent financing to the buyer, answer yes using the drop-down menu in the upper right section and complete the discounted financing worksheet. If the buyer's first loan was provided by USDA, also answer yes using the drop-down menu in the upper right section and complete, make sure you are using the most current version of the workbook available on the bank's website. And please check the date of the version located on the top right corner of the page. Okay, so now we'll hand it off to Sharon to go over scoring.
Okay, well, now we're on to scoring. So the project scoring commitments are outlined in the project evaluation form attached to the direct subsidy agreement as Exhibit A. If there are any changes to these projects' characteristics, the project sponsor must notify the bank to ensure that there are no adverse effects on the overall project score, which would render the project ineligible for subsidy. Project modifications may be made to any of the scoring categories, including but not limited to donated property, targeting, promotion of empowerment, special need, and large unit. Empowerment services must be available to all buyers free of charge. Due to social distancing requirements of COVID-19, we understand that empowerment programs may have changed and are not offered face-to-face at the same level prior to the pandemic. Acceptable empowerment services can include digital services with a live person, such as phone calls, Zoom meetings, and/or digital learning programs. Documentation for digital services can include proof of advertising for digital events, case notes of phone calls, or other record tracking digital attendance. If the sponsor is unable to provide one or more of the services submitted to at application, a modification to the type of service offered and possibly to the project score may be necessary. I'll turn it back over to you, Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So there are some changes under the 2021 AHP rule, including scoring changes that will make the program more accessible for owner-occupied projects. For disbursement and initial monitoring, please make sure you are going to our website to download the latest forms, as many have been updated to comply with the new regulation. Under the old regulation, a modification could be processed as long as a good cause was documented in writing. So effective 1/1/2021, for all modifications, Cure First is now added in the new regulation. The bank will first request that the project sponsor or owner make a reasonable effort to cure any modification within a reasonable period of time, or provide an explanation of why the cure is not possible. The need for good cause still remains. So for example, if a project had initially targeted all units at below 65% AMI, but now wanted to sell homes to families above 65% AMI, a reasonable period of time would need to pass where the sponsor attempted to find below 65% AMI buyers. Those efforts would need to be documented before a modification could be processed to sell homes to a higher AMI buyer. And one of the most common modifications and causes for non-compliance is when the project's final targeting does not match the original commitment. All units must be affordable as demonstrated by the housing expense ratios, which must be at or below 35% of the buyer's monthly income. At time of initial monitoring, we will ask for third-party backup documentation for a random sample of the units to ensure the actual household income and financing sources meet these requirements. Before uploading home buyer documentation to the bank, please redact all confidential and personal information such as Social Security numbers, ID numbers, special needs information, and medical conditions. Ensure the date of birth is visible since we need this information to determine if income verifications are required. So for construction or rehab projects, we also review the project's need for subsidy and financial feasibility at project completion. The Excel workbook includes a development budget like the workbook provided at time of disbursement. We compare the original budget from application to final actual cost. So be sure to provide explanations for any line item that shows significant variances. We check to ensure the budget is balanced and where total uses of funds equal to total sources of funds. 100% of the land costs and at least 35% of construction costs must be validated by third-party documentation. If the construction management is provided in-house, payroll history and copy of job description will need to be provided at initial monitoring. However, it is important to remember that land costs and in-house construction management costs will not be counted towards the 35% construction cost validation. Any AHP benchmark deviations will need to be explained and provide supporting backup documentation. Okay, so now let's move on to the development budget. The development budget or uses of funds worksheet compares the budget at application with the final actual cost. All development costs must be final. Select project complete using the drop-down menu at the top of the sheet and choose the building type. Any significant changes must be explained in the comments column to the right. We will request third-party documentation to validate the development budget, which includes a final settlement statement to validate the cost of land, final construction draw, or third-party invoices. Finally, please check the project sources equal to uses. If the budget does not balance, enter your explanation in the comment box at the bottom of this worksheet. If discounted financing is provided by the sponsor, an imbalance in the budget will occur, and you will need to complete the discounted financing worksheet as well. So after completing the worksheet, check the benchmark tab to ensure that there are no deviations. The construction cost per square foot benchmark will need to be checked manually. So for all benchmark deviations, a detailed quantifiable explanation and supporting documentation is required. For example, if there is an overage in the construction cost per square foot, we will need a quantifiable explanation of costs that are causing the deviation from the RS means in your area. We need to know the exact breakdown of overages from each development cost line item from the uses of funds worksheet with supporting backup documentation. Also, check that your residential square footage is reflected correctly, as this impacts the cost. And the RS means information can be found on the bank's website. And also, the developer fee must equal to or less than 15% of total development costs. And this increase is effective as of January 2022. And now I will hand off to Sharon to go over the retention documents.
Thanks, Kelly. All projects must have a legally enforceable retention mechanism to secure the AHP subsidy for 5 years from project completion. Template documents are available on the bank's website under AHP disbursement owner-occupied section. When using the template, please make sure to use both the promissory note and the writer to the deed of trust. The member institution may use their own deed of trust. If the member does not use the bank's templates, or if the template is altered, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. We also now have a specific retention document for use on tribal land to go along with the new 5-point scoring category for Native housing that was introduced in the 2022 application round. These documents do not need to be recorded, as they will still meet AHP regulation requirements for a legally enforceable retention mechanism. Template documents are available on the bank's AHP website under AHP disbursement owner. Specific areas of the document can be edited to address different tribal needs. However, if the member does not use the bank's template, or if the template is altered in any way that's not allowed, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. And back to Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So the final topic today is non-compliance. The most common cause is when the sponsors do not respond to the bank's initial monitoring request or are slow to respond. Also, the lack of documentation to support the project's need for subsidy and scoring categories, including income documentation, can cause the projects to be non-compliant. Another common cause is when a project has not demonstrated a need for subsidy, which may be due to the sources being greater than uses, or if the developer fee exceeds 15% of the development cost. Either one of these issues could trigger a partial or full recapture of the AHP subsidy. In addition, if there are changes in the scoring categories that reduce a project score to below the round's lowest score, the project may be disqualified from that round, and which would require the full recapture of the subsidy. If there are any significant changes in the project, it is imperative to communicate these changes with the bank staff as soon as possible and provide a cure plan and good cost explanation so that we can work with you to ensure the project remains eligible for subsidy. Any modification that is not communicated to or approved by the bank prior to initial monitoring may cause the project to be non-compliant. So in closing, we strongly recommend the use of AHP retention templates to ensure compliance with the AHP regulations. So now this concludes our presentation portion. So if you have any specific questions pertaining to your projects or any general questions, feel free to contact us by phone. And if you're not sure who to contact, your questions can be sent through our general AHP email, and it will be forwarded to the appropriate staff member based on the topic. So we will now open up for questions and answers. If you do not have any questions when you exit the webinar survey will pop up, and you'll be asked to answer a few questions, which will take less than 2 minutes of your time to complete. We just reorganized this webinar, so we would love your input to potentially incorporate your suggestions into our next webinar. For those of you that are staying for the Q&A session, please use the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen and enter your questions in the message box, and then we will read and respond to your questions accordingly. And if you're interested in learning more about other community investment programs or products, please visit our website to find out when other workshops and webinars are scheduled. So now I will give everyone a few minutes to type in your questions. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any questions today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to attend this webinar. And so this concludes our presentation.
Thank you.